Rook and two pawns versus rook in the case of those two pawns being doubled. Kick off with central pawns. This is a drawn position even though it's white to move, and the way that black draws it is to pretty much use Philidor's defense twice. However, white has a way to try and break the Philidor defense, and black's best way of defending from that point is to sort of be ready to go into a Klingenhorwitz defensive procedure. So you need to be comfortable with the Philidor defense, and you need to be comfortable with the Klingenhorwitz method. Otherwise, you could get tricked out of the draw. If I was playing this as white, I would definitely be testing your Klingenhorwitz technique, because it's probably white's best chance to try and win this. First of all, how does white break your Philidor defense? So we're just guarding the third rank. We'll see later on that as soon as white pushes these pawns, it's pretty easy for black to defend. You sort of do Philidor, then come down to the back rank, and then do Philidor again. But the way that the Philidor defense is broken is rook b7. Black just says, whatever, I'll just go into the third rank, keeps down the third rank, and then rook b6. That's how it's broken. Now, if there was only one pawn here, if it was just the d5 pawn, then we could just take that and play king d7 and just swap rooks. You can't do that here. That would be a win for white. That king and pawn ending is 1 for white. So we have to move the rook somewhere. Now, there are drawing moves other than the move that I reckon we all should just play, but it's tricky. It's tricky. The move we should play is rook g4. So when you move the rook off, you've sort of been busted out of the Philidor defense. Make sure you're ready to take this pawn if white decides to just sort of let you have that pawn, which I think is probably white's best winning try, to be honest. I'll get onto that in a sec. If I was playing this as white, I would now give up that pawn in one of two ways. You don't have to do that. Okay, rook g1 in this position is also a draw. By the way, when you play rook g4, you are basically ready to transpose into a Klingenhorwitz defensive setup in rook plus one pawn versus rook. That's why you need to know it. If you play rook g1, white comes in king c6. Black has only one drawing move in this position. So this rook g1 is giving you an extra headache. You've now got to find the only drawing move, which is king c8. If white was to just play rook a6, you've again got to find the only drawing move, which is rook c1 check, king d6. Black's only got one drawing move in this position, and it kind of goes on a bit like that, rook d1. And by the end of it all, you're going to end up in a Klingenhorwitz defensive procedure anyway, if white now lets you take this d pawn, which they probably would with, I don't know, king c6 or something. Although king c6, sorry, you'd end up going round in circles a little bit. But the point is, back in this position is that rook g4 is the simplest way to go about the draw. You need to be ready to go into a Klingenhorwitz if white sort of lets you take that d pawn, and if they don't let you take that d pawn by pushing d6, that's actually a much simpler draw, and you never need to worry about going into a Klingenhorwitz defensive procedure. So what are the two ways that white can just sort of let you take that d pawn? Well, king c6 is the first one, and you just take the d pawn. And this is now a Klingenhorwitz. So, for example, rook b8 check, king e7. That's a Klingenhorwitz defensive procedure. I was a little bit worried that if these were bishop's pawns rather than central pawns, hasn't our king just gone to the long side? But that would be more if the white king was already on d6 and our king had gone to f7. We might actually see that. I'm going to try and defend this as black in a minute against the bishop's pawns. So that's fine. Or in this position, I mean, what could white try? King d6. You then go, that now is in front of the d pawn, so you do go king to the short side. We might see rook c6 check, king back to d8, rook a6, king back to c8, go to the short side, check, king b7, rook x-ray defense of the d pawn. So you need to know that as soon as that's happened, you you put your rook off to the long side to deliver the check. So that's just Kling and Horwitz defensive procedure. If you're looking at some of those moves going, whoa, what's going on, you just need to get that sorted, basically. You need to get your Kling and Horwitz defensive procedure sorted. I've done a video on it, go and watch that. So that's one way that white can basically just let you take the d pawn. Another thing they could do is play rook h6, where they're intending king d6. Again, you've got a few drawing moves here, but probably the best one is king d7. Just come forward to stop king d6. Rook h7 check, king back to d8. And now, if white plays king d6, you're back in the Philidor setup, pretty much back to where you started. And if they play king c6, again, it's the Kling and Horwitz defensive procedure. I was worried that, isn't our king being forced off to the long side? It's not. So if it was like a white king on d6 and a black king on e8, then yes, your king's being forced off to the long side. Although that in itself would actually still be a draw, but in the case of a bishop's pawn, your king going to the long side would be a loss. But anyway, it's not king on d6 and e8, it's kings on c6 and d8. So, the white king came to d6 and the black king could go to the short side, c8 there. Don't want to get sidetracked too much by that. So anyway, after rook b6, breaking our Philidor, we play rook g4, and then if I was white, I'd probably play rook h6 here or king c6. I'm not sure, but I would make you demonstrate that you understand the Kling and Horwitz defensive procedure, because I think that's a harder thing to do than to just carry on with repeating Philidor again. Once this d pawn's gone forward, just like the Philidor defense against one pawn, then the rook just goes back. Yeah, sure, the king's got shelter here from checks on the d file, but then it can't step out. You just stay on the d file and wait to check. So white now has to look around. It's like, okay, what else have I got up my sleeve? What other tricks have we got? And not many. And I think even the solution against them you could find over the board. Whereas Kling and Horwitz, there's a few only moves in the middle of it where I don't think you could necessarily find it over the board. You have to be very precise. So that's why I would have given up the d pawn and just gone for it. Anyway, king c6, rook c1 check, king d5, rook h1. I'm not sure what that move's for. You could have just played rook to d1 or whatever. And there's just no way for white to make progress. You've always got, just like in the Philidor defense against one pawn. I mean, this is just the Philidor defense with one pawn, where white's got this extra d pawn, which I guess at least temporarily stops the checks. This is really white's only winning plan now, is to push the d pawn, because they've got shelter from the checks with this d4 pawn. But as soon as that d pawn gets pushed to d7, I was going to say you have to play, but again, there's lots of drawing moves again, but there's probably a lot of, they're probably just engine drawing moves with a lot of sneaky only moves to follow them. The easiest way to do this all day is just get your rook back to the 6th rank. I'm not sure that check was necessary. I would have just played rook h6 straight away. But yeah, check, rook h6, and then we just stay on the 3rd rank again. I guess we saw a check and then d5. I would have just stayed on the 3rd rank straight away, and we're sort of back in the same position. The only way that white can eventually make progress is to push this d pawn, and as soon as they do, you come back. This d7 pawn is kind of then irrelevant. It's just going to get taken at some point. There's just nowhere for the white king to escape all the checks, basically, down from behind. So I'm going to now have a go at this in the case of bishop's pawns. I've got a feeling that Stockfish sadly isn't going to try and break the Philidor defense and force us into a Kling and Horwitz. The reason I chose bishop's pawns for the demonstration is that worry about the king being forced to go to the long side which would be a loss, by the way, if your king's sort of forced to go to the long side in the case of a bishop pawn. But that's not the king going to the long side yet. It would be if the kings are here and here. That's the king being forced to go to the long side. This is just Klingenhorwitz defensive procedure. Rook h7, I mean, you just stay on the c pawn, and it's when white comes opposite, then you would go to b8. Let's have a go at it. I'm going to get this position, and we'll see what Stockfish does. So the board's flipped round, and the first thing Stockfish has done is deliver a check on f8, which is completely benign. Remember, we've got these two squares for our king to go back and forth on all day, which is what I'm going to do. That's a nothing move. I'm just going to keep my rook on the third rank. And annoying, I kind of want this challenge to happen, so we're forced to demonstrate something interesting, but I've got a feeling, yeah, that nothing interesting is going to be happening, which is a bit weird, isn't it? I don't know why engines can't... Oh, there we go. Brilliant. I was wrong, and I'm pleased to be wrong about that. Now, what's it going to do? Is it going to give up the c-pawn? No. Oh, well. Maybe it'll try it in a minute. It'll give up the c-pawn in a minute. Let's see. Is it, or is it going to play c6? That's a nothing move. Another nothing move. Eventually white's going to have to choose to do something, and it's not that. Either a challenge on the a6 square, followed by pushing the king and giving up the c4 pawn, or a challenge on... Or just pushing the c pawn, actually. You don't have to challenge on a6 to then push the c pawn. I mean, again, if nothing interesting comes out of this, then, and there you go, the c pawn's been pushed, then at least, you know, we could sort of take heart that this is easy. I've just got my rook behind. All right, it's not a barrage of checks, but the white king's got nowhere to go. And we've got these silly checks. It's just utterly pointless, isn't it? It fills you with confidence when you practice this against the engine, and it just can't do anything because it makes you think that, well, if I can draw it against Stockfish, I can draw it against anyone. Although I've said in the past that you get some positions where you know, you follow it in the textbook, you think, oh yeah, I'll just do that, and then you play it against the engine and it does a move you didn't think of and it slaughters you. But sometimes you get the reverse, where you try something against an engine and it doesn't really come up with the trickiest line from a human perspective. So you're never, like in this position now, I'm not going to be forced to demonstrate that I can draw this if I've been forced to transpose into the Klingenhorwitz position. Is there much more interesting to say? I mean, feel free to just forward the video a bit if you've already decided that this is boringly drawn and you could draw this all day. You're like, yeah, Stockfish is just going to play loads more moves, eventually play c7. I get it, don't worry. Come back here. Is he going to get bored and push the c-pawn? Nope. Lots of nothing moves. Another nothing move. At least if I stay on the c file, it might force it to do something to avoid threefold repetition. But it's looking like you might need to forward wind your video by about 2 minutes here. This is definitely a candidate for the most boring video I've produced so far. Okay, so it's finally pushed the c-pawn, and now we are ready for the Philidor position again. Rook off to the side, I'm coming down to the third rank. Okay, in that demonstration we saw a check being delivered. I have no interest in that check. I don't need it. And I think I might stop it here now, because I think that's enough. Okay, as soon as white, there's no way for white to make progress. Absolutely no way at all. As soon as this c pawn is pushed, this rook goes back up to the white's first rank. Is that right? White's first rank. I'm getting my orientation a bit mixed up here. And it's done. So I think I'm going to stop it there. I think that's actually enough now. It was probably boring enough already. So that went pretty well. You can see it's pretty easy. I don't think Stockfish did the best winning attempt from a human perspective, which would be to give up the pawn when it was still on c4 and force me to prove that I could follow the Kling-Horwitz procedure. So what about knight's pawns then? Because the Philidor defense works against all pawns. You don't need it against in rook and one pawn versus rook. The Philidor defense works against all pawns. You don't need it against knights or rook's pawns because first rank defense works and is arguably, well, it's just as easy if not easier. You can't have first rank defense against central or bishop's pawns, of course, but sometimes even against the pawns that Philidor's defense works against all of them, you can't get it in time, and that's why the Kling-Horwitz is necessary. If you're defending against the doubled pawns, then we've seen that the Kling-Horwitz may be necessary because the best way of well, it is necessary really. However you go about it, when in this case black breaks your Philidor defense by challenging you with their rook, you have to attack the back pawn, and that means that at that stage the attacking side can transpose you into Kling-Horwitz. The problem is that the Kling-Horwitz technique doesn't work against knight's pawns, so you would lose if you did that, which means you need another method. So this is actually a game. I haven't got the year of the game, but this actually was a game from quite some time ago, and it's white to play, and white now messed this up. Okay, white now played rook b8, which is a losing move. The thing you need to know about doubled knight's pawns and first rank defense, does first rank defense still work against doubled knight's pawns in the same way it worked against the knight's pawn? The answer is yes, but it has to be on the second rank. How about that for an answer? Does first rank defense work? Yes, but it has to be on the second rank. And it's very, very easy. Okay, you just do the first rank defense that we saw before, but you do it on the second rank. I'll show you how it's lost first of all by not doing it on the second rank, and then that will explain one last sneaky little try that black can do if you're defending it on the second rank. First of all, by the way, it doesn't really matter whether you play rook b8 or rook b7. I think rook b7 will come and attack this pawn. It's going to transpose pretty quickly to the failed rook b8 line. So rook a2 check, king g1, king comes into h3, and the white rook hasn't really got time to take that pawn anyway. It'd have to come back, check, g3, rook b1, and we're into the failed first rank defense. Let's look at that failed first rank defense. If we went rook b8, it's pretty similar moves to be honest. Rook a2 check, king h3, rook b3 check, g3, rook b1, we've transposed straight away. So why doesn't this work? Well, what black does is they get their rook to the third rank and they just patiently bring their g-pawn forward. So white does nothing. I guess white's argument at this stage is it's a knight's pawn, I've got my first rank defense. So that's the second g-pawn forward. Then they push the other one forward to g2. White just carries on doing nothing. They bring their rook to f3. That's why it was a good idea to have it on the third rank in the first place. And then white just carries on doing nothing. But then here's the killer blow. Rook f1 check. Oh dear. And the second knight's pawn's coming through. So you can't do first rank defense. You have to do second rank defense. But let's see what happens if black does a sort of similar try. Rook a4, we just keep our rook on the second rank. By the way, actually, as soon as black plays rook a4, we're back to the Philidor defense, which works against all pawns. So you could actually just do a Philidor defense from there. Rook a2 check, king g1, g3, and the thing is that, well, g3, black's already sort of given up. There is no way for, in this position, black to come and challenge our rook and break our Philidor defense. You'd have to transfer the rook to the i3 square. Black would have to play rook i2 and then rook to i3. And I think we might be in trouble, actually, if there was an i3 square. Although we're only in trouble because there's not an I file, so it's a bit cheeky that black could use the I file to put us in trouble and then say, oh, the I file no longer exists. You're making up the rules as you go along. So yeah, rook b3 would also just be a draw. G-pawn gets pushed. As soon as the G-pawn gets pushed, just like I did in that last game, we push the rook to the back. But let's not bother with rook b3. Let's carry on with the second rank defense and let black bring the G-pawn forward and set up the sneaky G3 rook f4 idea. That's what's being planned here. Okay. As soon as that happens, you stick your rook off that way. Okay. Or maybe a better try than G3 actually might have been rook f4 first, and you stay on the second rank, G3, so black's even got one more move ready for because they're going to try the same thing. Okay, if it's black to move here, rook f2 check would win. Okay, because the black king's coming to one of the key squares and you're done. But as soon as they're ready to play it, you stick your rook up there. Rook c8. And we've got a similar position to what we've just seen. Black just hasn't got time to set up something dangerous before your tirade of check starts. Rook f2 check, king g1, king h3, rook h8 check, and you know we're going to transpose to. I mean, I played rook g8 in that position. Engine was saying rook b8, but fine. And that's it really. Doubled pawns. You do Philidor lots against central or bishop's pawns. Make sure you're ready to transpose into a Klingon-Horwitz if the white king just sort of gives that d pawn up. I think that's white's best winning try. That works against central or bishop's pawns. If you've got knight's pawns and you're worried about that aspect of it a little bit, then first rank defense does work, but it only works on the second rank. And that's rook plus 2 pawns versus rook doubled pawns done.